welcome everyone to our third episode of High Voltage Recharge. And we strive to electrify, power up, and inspire your teaching through conversations with practicing senior high choir directors. I'm Nathan Dame. I'm the National Chair for Repertoire and Resources with ACDA. And essentially, we're like your AirPods. Charge it in that lightning port in 15 minutes, you're good to go. So we want to do all the things we can because you don't have a lot of time on your plates. So use this tool to be an audio for your drive to or from school, put it on during a conference period or whenever you need that extra jolt of energy. Awesome. Today's guest is an amazing conductor from the great state of Iowa. This is Mr. Jeff Knutson from Waukee High School. So thank you so much, Jeff, for being here.
Thanks for having me, Nathan.
So let's just jump right on in. What got you to this point to teach choral music, especially at the high school level?
Yeah, I came from a musical family, so my parents both taught collegiate music for most of their careers. My dad has a doctorate from Florida State. My mom has 2 master's degrees. So I'm their firstborn son, grew up going to concerts, and it was just kind of inevitable that this would probably be the career I would choose. But I really love what I do.
I love that. It's just so all in the family. So can you tell me at Waukee, what does your typical day look like? What's your choir program, your enrollment? Just zoom into your classroom. We want to know what you do.
Yeah, so we just had a big high school split. They opened a second high school because we were one of the faster growing buildings in the state. And so we were cut in half, and a new top division high school was opened. It would have been last fall. And so
Okay.
before the split, we had about 350 students in 9 curricular choirs, 3 show choirs, 3 jazz choirs. Now we're down to about 200 with 6 curricular choirs, 2 show choirs, 2 jazz choirs. And those show choirs and jazz choirs meet outside of the school day. We also audition students for the Iowa All-State Choir. We'll do regional and national ACDA honor choirs, trying to offer as many experiences for our students as possible. But I'm also very fortunate to have an accompanist in my rehearsals, and I have the afternoons to teach voice lessons to individuals or groups. And so that makes a huge difference in what I'm able to accomplish.
That's great. Can you tell me a little bit about how that's structured at your school with the voice lessons and stuff like that? Is that outside of the school day?
No, it's during the afternoon. And so they either come in during their lunch or during the second half of the day, because that's my availability. But they're required to come at least twice per quarter. And so they can come more times than that, but they have to at least see me twice, which it gives me a chance to touch base with students, really make sure that they are progressing in terms of vocal technique, the things that we really want to see them be doing based on their level, or sight reading. And so I kind of use those. They're not really formative assessments, or they're not really, they're not like formal assessments, but they're
Yeah,
really
yeah.
kind of check-ins. And so then it lets me kind of catch them up if they're behind, or go further with some of our real go-getters. And so um, it's really helpful.
I love that one-on-one attention. So do they have like an activity period or something like that? Or is that the end of their day? I'm just curious how that works in that schedule.
So they actually are missing 15 minutes of class. And so
Okay.
they'll miss geometry or biology or whatever and come for 15 minutes. And so that's something that had been established a long time ago when we were a much smaller school. We're a
Gotcha.
western suburb of Des Moines. And so Des Moines has really grown outward. And we've gone from being a small school to a large school, but we've kept some of those small school roots. And so the pull-out lessons are kind of one of the advantages for our school of having that.
That's great. So I'm going to just ask you some rapid fire questions. So, you're about to have your kids in the school and what another week and a half. So think about like getting them engaged and, focused in for the rehearsal and like building that sense of community. Do you have any favorite tools that you like to use?
So for my audition choir, we do a retreat the Saturday before school starts. And so I've got a 4 or 5 hour retreat somewhere in there where we place them into sections. And so I voice them. I'm a Luther College graduate, so I kind of do the Weston Noble thing. Um, and and so try that, and then get them started on some of the music that they're going to do for the fall. Have them elect some positions. We have a social chair that'll set up a monthly outside of the school event for the choir to go to, things like that, just to really make sure that they are bonding together. Then on the first day of school with every choir, because all of the rest of our choirs are non-auditioned choirs, they come in and it's just a normal day of choir. We sing right away, and I get into the nuts and bolts later about, the calendar for the year, things like that. I just think it's really important that on the first day they have a good time and they start doing what they're going to do every day for the whole year. I'm big on routine, and so by having them have a normal class period on the first day, it reinforces that routine. Especially two of the choirs that I direct are bass clef choirs, and so I
Okay.
find that idea of routine is really important for our bass clef singers.
Absolutely. I know they thrive on it. I'm right there with you. They're a fun, encouraging group, but boy, they need that structure. You bet. Um, so, do you have any specific warm ups or anything for like building tone for your high school singers? Mixed, bass clef, treble clef choirs, anything like that?
I do a lot of I have a general progression that I use. I'll start with stepwise, a lot of hums, a lot of oohs lower in the voice, and then kind of build up and then get into leaps towards the end. I tend to like warm-ups that are more vowel based and don't use a lot of words. And that's just kind of my own preference. Um, Beginning of the year for me is reminding them how to breathe. And so
Mm.
a lot of what I do at the beginning of the year is just kind of getting them reacquainted with the idea of good breathing in the choral rehearsal, and talking about posture, things like that. And I find that if I start there and lay that foundation, that by the end of the year, I'm able to do a lot more. And so most of what I say in warm ups for the first probably 3 weeks is breath driven.
That's great. Do they your kiddos have a favorite warm up that they ask to sing or that they really like get inspired by or anything?
Not really. I try and
Okay.
really switch out my warm ups a lot, and so I don't really have a necessary favorite.
Mhm.
Yeah, it just there. I think that it's good for them to just have variety, and so
Yeah,
I wouldn't say
absolutely.
there's a favorite for my classroom.
Okay. So you've navigated a little bit of this school shift there.
Mhm.
Have you found has changed at all the need for like recruitment and retention, or any great ideas that you've been willing to share? I mean, you before that, although you were a large high school, you were doing a lot of that with 350 kids. So that's you're obviously an expert at this. So is there anything that you could recommend for people trying to build a program?
So yeah, I've shifted. I think now what I teach in is much more of a realistic situation. I really felt like I was when we had three directors here and all those choirs. I felt like I was managing a lot and not getting as much face time. So now I'm in most of the rehearsals. We do have some simultaneous rehearsals with my colleague and I that I can't get into, but I know every kid's name now, which it just wasn't possible, especially the year before we split, being the year that we were all masked and distanced. It wasn't going to. It was just difficult to get to know every single sophomore soprano. Um, so now what I've found is I've repurposed a lot of my concerts and a lot of my extracurricular events to try and include our junior highs.
Hmm.
And the more times I can get them performing with our high school ensembles, the better I feel retention is going to be. I also make an effort to get there about once or twice a quarter to talk about what life will be like when they sing in high school choir. And I try and use that word when as much as I can, just so that they're picturing, yes, I'm going to sing in high school choir. But really, it's just for me getting as much face time there as possible. And then I really try and delegate and empower my seniors every year to take ownership of the choral program. So that's really important to me, whether it's section leaders with our top choir or with our show choir. We have dance captains. And so oftentimes some of those singers will go to the junior high and assist with some before school rehearsals on a weekly basis. And so they get to kind of be the ninth grade and eighth graders' biggest cheerleaders because we're a 10 through 12 building.
Okay.
And so they're over there working with those students and kind of saying, well, at the high school we do it this way, and this is a way that you can kind of up, raise your performance, whatever it may be. But just if they get to know those students and see, oh, this is what it's going to be like when I sing in high school too, I think that that's also really helpful. It's
Okay.
that face time, it's getting them to know the high school kids and want to be that next level up.
Yeah. I'm just thinking in my mind now that you said you were 10 through 12, that 350, those are huge, like grade classes. No wonder it was hard to get that one on one with
Right.
them. And I'm sure that scheduling those voice lessons and stuff are also like really, that's a lot on
Well,
your
that's why I
plate.
think it would be 2 per quarter. I'd like it to
Yeah.
be more, but I just can't cycle through faster, and if kids are missing lessons, then, I try and give them every opportunity to come back in, and so I let them schedule.
Hmm.
But for especially my sophomore bass clef singers, I really have to be proactive in saying, "All right, everyone pull out your computers. We're gonna sign up for a voice lesson in the next 2 weeks, and you all need to come see me." But once they have that kind of built, then it works pretty well.
I love that. So you mentioned you had three directors, and so you mentioned you have an accompanist now. Is that your second person, or is that in addition to maybe another choral director?
So before the high school split, we actually had 3 full-time choir directors and 2 part-time accompanists who would come in,
Wow.
and we shared them amongst our rehearsals. And so in the high school split, both of my colleagues went to the other building to open that new high school, and one of our 2 accompanists went there. The other accompanist stayed, and then we hired a colleague to work with me.
Okay, gotcha.
So
That's great.
we're very well supported. I have great support from my administration, which is really helpful. And having taught in this is my 4th high school in Iowa that I've taught in. 3 of the 4 had accompanists that were in the rehearsal. All of them offered voice lessons and pullouts from class, and so that, at least around Iowa, has been kind of the norm I've found, which is really helpful. And if
That's
you can,
really unique. Yeah, we have a voice lesson program in Texas where I teach, but it's all, hired, consultants and actual like private vocal faculty that come in. And they tend to have a performance background, which is wonderful, but I've never thought of it where it was the choral director that's had that. I don't think that's a thing here. So I love this because I learned through these processes of like meeting and talking to people like you. It's very unique. So anyway,
well, just learning what pathway do we want specific voice types to take. So for our bass clef singers, who really they learn from me, what pedagogically do we teach when, and what's kind of the journey? And obviously the voices are changing, and over time at different rates. But what are the things that I need to be a good teacher of, and really reinforce, and what can benefit the choral rehearsal, what just needs to be taught, that kind of stuff.
mhm,
But yeah, it's a cool situation out here to have voice lessons during the school day.
yeah. Well, let's go on to some repertoire winners. Like, do you have any all-time favorites or like what we call choir crack? The
Yeah.
kids keep singing them, and they're even in the hallway. They just like, can we sing? Blah blah blah. Like, maybe it's bass clef choir, maybe it's mixed, maybe treble. But like, are any of them jump out at you?
So yeah, I mean, I love just looking for repertoire all the time. And some of my favorites that I've done through the years, I really like the music of Sean Kirchner. Um, he's an Iowa guy who now lives in LA, and is writing great stuff. His cornerstone for either is for all voicing, so mixed choir, bass clef, treble clef. But they love that. My audition choir, my first year I programmed Chaka by Sidney Guillaume, and there was one time that we were done with class and I had to cut them off, and they went out of the room singing the rest of the song, which was cool. Um, I think for me, a lot of what I try and find are for my bass clef choirs things that make them just feel like they're really proud of what they're doing, and so either finding things that are steeped in like really valid historical context, or beautiful text that's set really well, or just fun sings, and kind of finding at least one of those all the time. I find that Eugene Rogers, his choral series for bass clef singers, is really, really helpful. I've programmed a lot of the music from that choral series. Um, some of my other favorites through the years would be Signs of the Judgment by Butler. I did that with my auditioned mixed choir. I love Felix Mendelssohn. My wife and I just had our second child and named him Felix. So his Weihnachten is one of my all-time favorites. Indadana by Barrett is a good one. Eschenwald's anything that he has written, I really like. Um, yeah, there's so much, but I just love searching for repertoire all the time. And I'm really into the English Renaissance, and so I've programmed some stuff by William Byrd, Thomas Tallis, and I feel like I do one Renaissance piece a year. The one I'm gearing up to teach right now is by Guerrero. It's Ave Virgo Sanctissima, and that was the audition piece for my audition choir. So I'm excited about that. But just trying to find internationally uh, composers that aren't programmed a lot in the United States, but are doing good things internationally. So I've programmed for the fall. There's a Latvian piece by Selga Menci, Mence, Kala Skala Debesis, that I'm really excited about. I've got great sopranos, and so that's going to test them. And then a Darius Lim piece, Gloria Alleluia. So those are things that I'm excited to do, but I just love looking for new stuff. I feel like when I have 15 minutes, that's one of the things that I catch myself doing is just searching composers' websites, or I liked this piece. What else has this composer written? And I'll go listen to everything they've ever done, and just think about what fits where my choirs are going to be throughout the year. Because this is year 6 for me at Waukee, and so I've kind of learned in the fall it needs to be this type of piece, in the winter this type of piece, just so that there's a progression and that there's skill sets that are being built, so I can do some really really tough stuff in the spring.
Love your scope. I mean, you kind of hit on my next question. So can I change it up a little bit? And you just alluded to, let's talk about your top mix choir audition group. You said, I want to do this kind of piece in the fall, this kind of piece in the winter, and then aim for something tough in the spring. Can you talk a little bit, just, I mean, without going into too much detail, like what does that process look like for you for that top group, like the scope of where you take them at the beginning of the year and where you hope to go?
Right. So when they audition in the spring, and they have to do a scale. They do a 4-bar sight reading that has chromaticism, and they do a prepared part of a piece that is typically a Latin Renaissance piece. So in this year's case, it was the Guerrero, and then they also do some tonal memory. And so they're able to hold on. Like I don't touch the piano much in rehearsal with them, and that's a skill that we build in the other choirs, so that when they get there, usually they don't need it. But some of the early things I want them to learn are the approach to a musical line. And so, how does one note relate to the note right next to it? And so, this Renaissance music, I find, is a really good way to teach how to do a singable line, especially if it's imitative polyphony, because once you teach that motive, then you can just kind of place it throughout. And so, that's really useful. It reinforces the idea of independence too, so that's important. Um, a lot of the other stuff that I'll do in the fall, I'll do something that's kind of a big sing and just let them go, kind of let go of the reins and let them make some noise. So the limb is kind of that this year, and it lets them kind of make some sound. But it's rhythmically complex, and so it's kind of laying the foundation for me of duples versus triples, um, switching kind of different feels. And so it's in 4/4 in the section that I'm really thinking about that's faster, but um, it's kind of like a 2/4 bar and then a 6/8 bar and then a 3/4 bar. And so they're gonna have to learn to count is basically my point there. But setting those building blocks, and then in the winter, when I move away from talking more about breath and onset to initiating or sustaining a really legato line, I'm going to pick something that's really beautiful and legato, so that they can kind of learn to engage that breath now that they're taking a good one. And so there's kind of that progression. But by doing something that's rhythmically complex in the fall, I can come back to something rhythmically complex that maybe requires that really connected singing in the spring. And I play with amounts of Debussy in the fall just to kind of test what they're capable of. And then it kind of tells me where I need to kind of build leadership within the ensemble. And so that's also really helpful to me.
That's really, really great stuff. Thank you for sharing all that detail. So let me transfer to brand new teacher. Go back to you, year number one.
Mhm.
Oh, so what advice would you have for your younger self? I know you had, a very musical family, but like, is there something that you would recommend for a brand new choral director getting into high school teaching for the first time?
Yeah, I think the important things are you need to be consistent for kids. And so start on time, end on time, and use your time wisely in rehearsal. I believe in, I call it proactive discipline. So a lot of times as a young teacher, we're reactionary. We see so and so in the tenor sections on their cell phone, or the two altos in the front row are talking, and then we react in the moment. If we pace our rehearsals effectively and try and have more time of the rehearsal spent with everyone doing something, even if it's everyone sing the alto line, they're at least engaged, and it prevents them from finding something else to do. I think I read that the average attention span of the high school student is 7 seconds, and that may be not correct anymore. It might be lower, but I mean, if you don't have them doing anything, they're going to find something to do. And so, for me, with two bass clef choirs, I think it's so important that they're just always doing something that is productive to the rehearsal. And so, transition times are important, but um, I mentioned it earlier, that idea of routine. I'm going to start on time and I'm going to do the same thing in the same order. So my typical rehearsal, which is 45 minutes, is going to look like we start warm-ups right on time. That's 5 to 7 minutes. I'll do announcements. We'll do sight reading, which is another 5 to 7 minutes. and then I'll do piece number 1, piece number 2. If I can get to piece number 3, great. Um, but just try to make sure that they're always doing something, and that you're not allowing bad behaviors and bad habits to be built.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be my number one piece of advice for a young teacher.
Very wise. Thank you for sharing. So, you just had a kiddo, like you said. So how do you balance being a high school choir director in a big old program that's very active, show choir, all the curricular, groups, and then life outside of school? Have you found any like hacks, for work-life balance?
Um, I'd like to say that I have the magic answer, but I think
Me
for
too.
stretches of the year, I'm really good. So the last 2 months or so, I haven't done as much. I used to come into school 3 times a week over the summer just to stay on track with my emails and my ordering of stuff for the next year and everything. And I did less of that this year and tried to get more efficient, but that came with time and it did require some work. Something that I implemented when I was a young teacher, I didn't do much to stay active when I was even a college student, but I took up running when I started teaching. And so I've just tried to set goals for myself. So last fall I ran a marathon, which was a huge deal for me. But that's one of my things, that you need your things outside of school that aren't music, because we all are choir directors because we love choral music. And I think it's very easy for that to just consume your life. And I remember when I was starting out that I'd have a bad rehearsal and it would ruin my week outside of school. And so I had to build in those hobbies and make sure that I had those in place. My district doesn't allow me to do anything on Wednesday nights beyond 5:30. It's a church thing that it was started, but now it's more than that. It's a night that parents are going to see their kids because it's so easy to schedule one thing over the top of the next. And so I've built in. I have a group of friends that live in the area for me, and we call it family dinner. And so weekly we get together, and it gives me that social outlet that my job is not the only thing in my life. Um, and I have extra motivation now to just get home because I have a 1 year old and a 3 week old. So it's really, I don't want to miss those moments. I want to show up for them and I want them to get to really know me too. So it's just, your priorities shift as things like that happen, I think. And um, it's committing to being present everywhere. I also try to stay off my email as much as I can at home. I'm not always good about it, um, but that's something I'm trying to get better about, and just leave work at work and not take my laptop home. Um, not get on my computer for school unless I'm in the building. That was something I set for myself this summer, and it's been pretty successful.
It's great. I think we're all a work in progress. I'm right there with you. I
100%.
actually took up running too a few years ago. So fellow marathoner right there with you. So it's
That's
good.
awesome.
It feels really good. And I feel like those days that I don't run or that I don't do something active, it just feels like, yeah,
Yeah, I
it
noticed
really
when I
is.
like a full week of running, if I don't run for a week, I usually feel pretty awful. So I don't
Mhm.
know. I think whatever your thing is that's not music and not teaching all the time, if you can build something in for a hobby, it's so important.
Mhm. Well, we're about to wrap up, but I've got my last question for you. You've probably been influenced by many great choral directors. So my question would be, who would you look at for inspiration and that you could recommend to us as a future guest on our show that teaches high school, maybe even in another state or there in Iowa?
Yeah, someone that I really respect and admire is Ted Brimeyer. He teaches at Urbandale High School. And so Ted is right down the road from me. We actually collaborate on a concert every fall. He performed at the Kansas City National Convention, and he performed at the regional convention in Chicago with my choir. Um, and so he does great things. He's incredibly engaging in rehearsal. I think with him, singers have a ton of fun in rehearsal, and he is really good about facilitating that. Um, so he would be a person that I've tried to steal a lot of things from, and I think that if if you don't know Ted, you'd really benefit from getting to know him as an ACDA member.
Wonderful. Well, Jeff, we so appreciate your time and wish you all the best in the rest of this year. And thanks so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.